Hey. You. Hi there. It's 4:19. Do you have a minute? Good. Then let's pack a bowl. 'Cause it's time for Cannabis Talk, a special 420 themed segment of the Almost Daily Zencast, hosted by spiritual cannabis mystic, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's get lit, folks! Yeah.
Hello and namaste. Greetings and that was not part of the recording. That was live. I'm so sorry for coughing in your ears. 1 second, please. And the music that kicked off the show, I believe, unless I royally screwed up and got the title back, mixed up with somebody else. But that should be Maple Leaf Rag, played by Scott Joplin, way back in the day. A beautiful, awesome, badass piece of piano playing. And, a song with the word leaf in it, which is just one of those fun words that in pop culture has an automatic, a giggle level of, +3. 'Cause you just talk about leaf. And you add it, insert giggles here. I digress. Welcome to the show. I am Cannabis Mystic, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. I mean that seriously and sincerely, but also in a haphazard sort of I don't belong to any organized religion, and I didn't get trained by anybody from any organized anything tradition. I just have a relationship with weed that goes back a little bit longer than your average recent joining member of the tribe. No offense. But and I don't say that in a judgmental way, but I guess you only say the no offense part if you kind of feel like you are. I feel people might take offense. Anyways, it was just 420. I was actually smoking. I am smoking with y'all now. Thanks for tuning in. I struggled for a bit there because I got the impetus to do a show, but I had also told myself that today I would execute the experimental process of doing what I think I'm kind of using the working title of like a multiplex edition of an episode of like Conversations With. And I was going to do Conversations With Me, Myself, and I. The incorrigible Mr. Zeppo talks to himself. Or something like that, right? It's a rough working title. And as I've shared with you before on the show, folks, and forgive the random, this is the cannabis segment, so it's even randomer than usual. So brace yourselves. And stick with me, because ultimately it all kind of weeds back together again. Spirals. Interlooping spirals of spiraling thought. The fuck was I saying? I don't know, but I hope you enjoy that Scott Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag is the opening credit of the show. It's public domain, so you also can use it for your podcast show if you are contemplating running your own. But maybe, don't do it exactly the way I did it, because that would be rude. Maybe do it a different way. I don't know what that means for you, but it means something to me. It's 4:26 p.m. on a Friday, December 18th. If you believe in, astrological stuff and signs and alignments and meanings and stuff, the Nativity Star is going to be out and about, not tonight, I don't think specifically, but this holiday season. 2020 wouldn't be 2020 without an extra dose of crazy things happening celestially in the night sky, as it were. We've had not one, but two near misses, if I'm not mistaken. If I'm not trying to fearmonger, just trying to rattle off some facts. I myself am somewhat accustomed to surviving the end of the world. Surviving multiple ends of multiple worlds is hard to conjugate in your mouth on the fly. But I don't know about you. I don't know about you all. I don't know about stumbled right into my tongue with that. I don't know about y'all. I mean that with respect. I'm not being rude. I love the word y'all, for reals. Like, it's a great, useful word. Why don't we just include it in the lexicon? Why does Homer Simpson, not to go on off a really radically strange, divergent tangent, but honest to goodness question that comes to mind right now that I think has been burning a hole in my pocket for a very long time. Why does Homer Simpson have a word in the dictionary, but not the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo? Not to turn it into an about me thing, because I don't even really exist. We don't really exist, so that should always humble us. But, is y'all already in the dictionary and I'm just being a brute? Kind of a, what do you call it? There's a name for that. Neophyte? No. A lumbar support? No. A Luddite? Am I being a Luddite? I'll have to check. Forgive me, dictionary and/or dictionary.com and/or any entity that's related to dictionary making. Please don't sue me. I love dictionaries, though. So everybody go buy a dictionary. Get yourself one. There's cheap ones. You don't even have to get. It's not like you're going to drop $100 on a book you're never going to use, right? Like, you can get a $10.99 and/or cheaper paperback, thick AF dictionary. Shop them around. Shop them out. Get online and compare. Although that's never the same. Pictures, they're misleading. You don't get to feel the heft and weight and quality of paper in your hands. But get a dictionary, everybody. It's great. They're great books. I've got at least 2. One of which, if I may get dictionary snooty, where are you? That's the New Oxford Annotated Bible, which is, by biblical standards, a bit like saying this is the Oxford Dictionary of the Bible. Kind of literally, and also just metaphorically. But I could have sworn I had a big red Oxford. Maybe I'm tripping and I'm thinking of this Bible and not the dictionary. But am I an ass? Do I not currently have a dictionary? Oh, it must be in the garage. It must be in the garage and or in a box in the garage. Slowly but surely, I'm unpacking, and by that I mean I've barely but looked at them all of 2020. But I have this enormous lifelong collection of books that I have occasionally reluctantly tried to purge, but have, dragged through my life. Sometimes literally just stuffing every book I can salvage and keep into my car, along with everything else that needs to go with me as I leave a place. But let's not. No hard feelings, and there kind of was a point to the show. But welcome to it. Thanks for tuning in, dear friends and listeners. Sorry for coughing right in your ears. And also forgive me if you're either new or an old-time listener that's come back, because I'm kind of back on the air, on the proverbial air more often, on kind of semi-regular basis now, like I promised I would someday. And you've noticed that the show is technically louder. For some people, it may not sound much louder at all. For some people, it may sound like, why the fuck is this so fucking loud now? And that's because for a certain percentage of people, it was inaudibly not loud, except for the music. The music was like raw source loud and could sound great with adjusting of the device volume. And I heard an earful from some of these folk, not a lot, but I love all of the listeners that comprise my audience now and forever, simultaneously, retroactively into the past, and whatever you call future actively into the future. As I speak these words now, I love you dearly and sincerely, whoever you are. If you're listening to this, thanks. Here's a little bit of my love as one stressed out, talking ambulatory meat sack to another, as a life vessel here on this living womb of life vessels. Bloop. A little. Like, if I lived in a world in which I could just make animated, cartoony things happen in my head, but also communicate them to people, which I do as a character of literature, you would see, like, heart eyeball emojis and blushy emojis, like, doing that messenger thing where they... But in my own style, kind of very flat and cartoony, like either a really genius 2.5-year-old or a somewhat delinquent 4.5-year-old drew them. What do I know about how old kids start drawing? I haven't been a kid in forever. But, fun fact, everybody was a kid once. We were all idiots drooling on ourselves and shitting our pants. Completely dependent on others. And their benign, humble patience to put up with our worst behavior. Relative to, being swaddling toddlers. What am I rambling about? I don't know. What was the show going to be about? I'll remember in a second, especially once I click through all these tabs. Right. Wanted to give credit to where credit is due. There's a lot of great oldie-time music out there, by the way, both in public domain and just inside of that, that deserves curious ears of people who are hungry for a diverse knowledge of music history. Like, get out there, folks. Don't get stuck on. It's like, there's the adage about like get out of your town, go visit, get to know your state, travel around a bit. In Europe, it's almost baked into the cake, part of your high school experience, quote unquote. It's part of the ritual that you just go off with a group of your trusted friends and perhaps like an older, I don't want to say chaperone, but an older friend to sort of be there to like show you all the ropes and make sure you don't do dumb things that might, end up hurting you or threatening yourself criminally and or, physically, because we're dumb. We're dumb brute beasts at the root base of it, no matter who you are. Let's just admit that. As ambulatory, talking, meek, sats. That didn't come out so sexy sounding. As ambulatory, talking meat sacks, as sophisticated as we can pretend to be, we are all also fundamentally brute beasts. And let's just admit that. Is that too crazy of a thing? I think we would all chill the fuck out a little bit. If, across all timelines, on all planets, in all dimensions, if everyone just saddled up to that one, took a big sip, and went, yeah, you're right. Doesn't matter how tall my buildings are, and doesn't matter how big my machines have become. Doesn't matter how quickly I can destroy all of this. We're all just suffering, injured inner childs, enveloped in brute, beastly creatures with outrageous impulse control problems. I don't know. Cynic, perhaps. Stoner, absolutely. Welcome to the show. In other news, I was going to almost do a little segment on something that I thought was sort of like happening right here and right now and isn't, which I then, drew on for inspiration. But I thought I'd pass this along. It's sort of weird and interesting and also kind of sad that this has already played out and apparently they've lost. Now, I don't know. Are they still around? Hopefully. But from a little while ago, back when the first big, wave of acceptance vis-a-vis public mandate for decriminalization, at least, if not actual legalization, of cannabis, there was this innovative sounding to me, although I haven't gone and visited, and there's been more than one. But there's one that I see as sort of interesting, weird. I remember hearing about them, and I remember putting a little in this news app. I put a little thing, I typed in their name and said, "Gather me stories about them," because I wanted to be able to come back and kind of review headlines and be able to do a deep dive later. And I guess I'll have to come around back to it in the future. But because I didn't want to make the whole episode about this, but I just wanted to acknowledge that it sort of triggered a series of questions in my mind. But if you've never heard of them, there was, and maybe perhaps, I mean no disrespect in either direction, probably might still there be, maybe still is, there is and or maybe might have been once, depending on whether or not it's still around, which I am not actually clear on, a church called the First Church of Cannabis. There's multiple churches of cannabis that sprung up, because I remember coming across the Facebook pages for one, not through the news, but through just like bouncing around on Facebook. And it was in a different state. This one that I have randomly sort of like, I don't know how long ago I made this pin, but the stories are from like 3-4 years ago. and they all appear to be about this one in the same state, I believe. But whatever else is going on, which I'll come back around to in a future episode, and we'll have to have an interesting discussion about that. They inspired me, and it has been inspirational to me, because long before that wave of mainstream acceptance and public mandate for medicinal and recreational access, I had come to personal experience-based conclusions that, like, this must be something that organically, if one can attribute intent to an organism like food, like a tree, like bananas, is intended to deliver X, Y, and Z combination of nutrients to you, then cannabis is intended to deliver THC and CBD, plus, what other interesting mix of and at various times, for various reasons and various occasions, and at various levels of joking and kidding amongst real life friends, I have openly said amongst friends, not so much publicly on the show or anything, although I have obviously said this on the show, that I would love to be a part of and or a founding member of, which I haven't had a chance yet, and I don't know if there's one happening here in California, but there might be, worth looking into, but of a cannabis church. A church that welcomes, embraces cannabis enthusiasts, and helps establish healthy, rational, spiritually anchored, rooted in healing, not abuse, etc. Those kinds of things, and contributes to the convergence of popular cannabis culture and a innovative spiritual modality inspired by and through and with and or utilizing this divine plant, this sacred plant. It would seem that as of about 2.5, maybe 3 years ago, somewhere in that time frame, generally speaking, this First Church of Cannabis, which I'm not entirely sure if it was literally the first, probably in their state for sure, but in the country, I know of another one that is also called the First Church of Cannabis. I just can't remember what state they were in. But this Church of Cannabis tried to, and I'm not entirely clear on the details, which is why I want to circle back on it in a future episode. But I was impressed, and this kind of inspired this whole episode. But they fought for, in court apparently, which was rejected by a judge, I'm gathering, all based on headlines that I've scanned that involved, the First Church of Cannabis. The fight over recognizing cannabis, marijuana, as a sacrament. But what I find fascinating there is that, Congress is clear that in the United States, government shall not make any law that impinges on the rights of people to express their religious practices and there's religious freedom in this country, right? Freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom to associate, all the freedoms that we're so freedomly, we still have those. So I stepped back from that and I thought about, like, what shall I ramble about on today's episode of Cannabis Talk 420, which I slightly finally landed on a name. It's always been up in the air because I like to be able to do like an acronym hashtag and a full name hashtag. I don't know, for branding, I guess. So CT420 kind of just rolls right off the tongue. Cannabis Talk 420. And I didn't put the dots in for this particular cover of this segment, but it's meant because I don't really do this episode, this segment of the show, unless I feel like activated, motivated, ready, and situated to be ready to hit record, almost, if not perfectly on time, for it to be 419 when the pre-recorded intro to the show says, hey, it's 419. You got a minute? Which I was a little bit late today, folks. And for anybody who gives a fuck, I apologize. I don't think anybody actually does, but should you? So, today's title, the question that developed in my mind after sort of randomly, I was sitting here feeling like, it's just the right time to get ready to like finish this bowl that I'm smoking. I'll admit to that. And pack another one and set it aside so it's ready and not smoke through all this and get, too in over it. A barrel of weed. And to coin a term on the fly. And I thought about things based on, this church out there fought a well-intentioned fight for their right to use this plant like a sacrament. And that's both sort of obtusely inspiring in the sort of vague, open-ended use of the term, oh, how inspiring, and also literally directly inspiring because it ought to be. For those of you who may not be familiar with my personal opinion about cannabis, I'm convinced that no matter how you slice it, cannabis, and what I mean by no matter how you slice it is that, like, there's multiple ways that the following can be explained. And no matter which way you slice it, phenomenologically, I think my experience proves out and remains true and is sort of valid and can be tested. I don't want to call it science, right? Because I'm not a scientist. I'm not a cannabis scientist. I would love to be. I wish that if there had been, while I was in high school, already a kind of burgeoning cannabis market or markets and a degree in the study of the horticulture specific to cannabis for growing and manufacturing. And I could be like, how some people I just want to get out there to wine country and get a little plot of land and start making my own wine and selling it to people. I really would love to like slide into retiring and to just like growing my own couture cannabis. Do I have all the wicked knowledge required necessary for that? And or the gear? No, not quite. Not really. Not necessarily. But, as I point out on the title card for the show, can't we just grow weed like tomatoes? My answer to that, politically, theoretically, philosophically, sociologically, culturally, and spiritually, is a resounding yes, we should. Because how many people actually grow tomatoes? For reals. And, actively cook with them. Not that many. And bless your hearts, all of you who do. it's awesome. It's also a big pain in the butt, right? But it's something that you've got a deep passion for. But if we can live in a world where it's legal and perfectly allowed and admired widely, if not wildly, to play with that reoccurring funny tongue twister, for people to, if it's totally okay for people to brew their own beer and start that off as a hobby and eventually become their own real beer business that turns into whatever you call that, boutique beer. Oh, how I wish we could live in a world where you can also equally, with as much ease and without any fear on any level of that being the cause for which you will someday suddenly find yourself, getting dragged away in chains, just be able to grow weed like it's a food. Why? Because quite frankly, I have, in as much as that California did indeed include the right to grow weed, both when they passed their medicinal laws, which I was a card-carrying member, and I'm also one of the lazy bums who I should be chastised by everybody else who maintained it. I failed to maintain my medicinal card only, by lack of scraping together the funds right around the time that it, was to be renewed, and then being lazy about it the rest of my life. Because we promptly then did the next proposition that, decriminalized it, and now people can recreationally acquire and transport and all that. And grow and hone. So, this is 420. Sorry, it is 420. Welcome to the show. Ha ha ha. So forgive me for a hot second while I, puff and pass. As a would-be aspiring on-air personality, I've learned that the one thing I don't want to do is talk through that. As cool as it would be that I could just blithely and casually and blasedly and without any worries talk through my smoking process. I know now that at this age, for whatever combination of reasons, it tears the fuck out of my voice. And I would encourage you all to think of that as a lesson learned by an old-timer, all you young kids out there tuning in to listen about the intersection of pop culture and pot culture. I prefer cannabis, by the way. I may or may not have already rambled about why I prefer cannabis as a word. So I won't bore you to tears with that now. I was saying, no matter how you slice it, how you approach cannabis, your conscious intent radically alters everything. And your own experience can be, to not overstate the phenomena, genuinely informed by the way in which you frame your attitude, the way in which you position your strategic thinking, the way in which you literally and figuratively approach the plant as you choose to consume it. So there's that, dear fellow cannabis enthusiasts of the world. I humbly invite you to take a moment to contemplate that and to cleanse the palate, for I have rambled quite a bit already and shoulda, coulda, woulda, played a bit EDM by the notorious animatronic DJ Zed a hot minute ago. But here we are. Let's play it now anyways. The Deeper, the Better, from the fictional album End Times, mixed by DJ Zed on the Remix Live app. Welcome back. Did you forget what the fuck we were just talking about? So did I. No, I tease. 420. 420 pop culture. The pop culture of 420. Is it on the back burner? Is it on the way out? Is it already overburdened by hyper-commercialization and price gouging? Do we really need little glass jars? That's I mean, I love glass. Glass used to be, like, absurdly cheap. And I don't know what's up, what shenanigans are going on in the glass industry. And I'm not casting aspersions, nor do I mean to sound or appear to be, trying to insult the industry. Because now that corporations are people, I sometimes sit around getting a little bit way too paranoid about, Pepsi Cola suing me for never saying a polite word about them or some nonsense like that. Not that I'm famous enough, right? I'd have to have huge outreach. I'd have to have a huge audience base. And they say that every overnight success is a 10-year-long story. I've been doing this podcast for 4 years. God forbid I have to go 9 years of doing this podcast with only a handful of people tuning in and rooting for me. Bless your hearts. I love you guys. I wake up every day, and believe it or not, you're on the list of everybody I pray for. And you're on like the list of reasons that I feel I have something worth looking forward to. Because no matter how long I may go on mini and or medium and or full-term hiatus, when I do, because I will just like bugger off and not do a podcast episode for way too long. Thus, not my very not consistent numbers. Even on those long stretches of time, friends, when I sit and woolly gather and daydream and contemplate the deep need for a sense of purpose and all of those other philosophical things, you're there in a very special reserved track of infinite thinking in the many layered multi-track loopy madness that is my mind. Welcome back to the show, folks. Thanks to the music, DJ Zed. Why isn't there a 420 cannabis church near me? I would love, and this is just, I'm sharing with you my raw vision for how I would love for a cannabis church to fit into my life as a congregant member. I would love for it to be a safe and secure compound, right? That is also 24 hours accessible. In a very well-staffed, it doesn't get shady and dodgy, and there isn't creepy people there that are like the bottom of the barrel's choices on, staffing. But like sincere, honest, 24-hour, and at any point in time, 24 hours a day, anybody can come in and sit down and have a simple, humble, easy to make, sustainable, easy to sort of like cafeteria food, but it's also like not toxic junk that will kill you. It's some sort of right in the middle, kind of like it's nutritious and warm, and it's also not, a huge exorbitant expense on the church to be able to serve 24 hours a day. And while on the campus, you can, for free, smoke weed and either lounge around in the public. And we used to sort of do this, right? Of course, they were considered dens of iniquity. And I'm sure if someone tried to do this, immediately, like the adamant hater churches would turn to that term. Den of iniquity! Shouldn't do that kind of thing because it hurts my voice. This should also be like a sacred temple space that isn't, it's always available, you can always walk in, but it's always solemn. And I'm not entirely sure what the combination of qualities required for it to be solemn, other than like peer enforcement. But if you've ever walked into a tiny church in a strip mall, there's a sort of like socially enforced solemnity that can be achieved with lighting and candles and music. And it's sort of like how in theater, if you create enough of the indicators for a certain vibe, you kind of get the audience to vibe that vibe without actually knowing what creates that vibe. You just know what some of the trademark, hallmark indicators of it are. Well, there's also walking into an enormous, authentically, sincerely, kind of mind-meltingly beautiful temple space of ancient origins. Not like a ruins of a temple, but of still, like people walk in and there's an automatic hush. And there doesn't need to be quiet music playing, and there doesn't need to be people asking you to be hush. There's a hush. Because of the building. What causes that? Is it just the sheer volume of the sort of more epic scope? Not to, I'm not judging or comparing, because it isn't the building, as we have been so rightly and righteously reminded on a couple of different occasions, if I'm not mistaken, by a couple of different messengers, if memory vaguely serves. It's not the building, it's the body of the people who gather and what? That's the part that seems to have been like smudged out and conveniently never talked about. It isn't just gather and agree who to hate. If you think that's what it means to be the body of Christ or the body of a church or the fellowship of... No! Yeah, that's crazy talk. It's supposed to be a true, genuine, authentic, healing, spiritual practice. That's the widgy bit that got smudged out. Authentic prophets don't teach belief paradigms. They teach you how to breathe and do yoga and meditate and eat and other things in a meaningful way that connects your mind and your body and your soul into your own larger spiritual phenomena, which is a gateway to the collective larger spiritual phenomena. That which I often reference to as like the species-wide spiritual network. I don't mean a media empire. That'd be hilarious. SWSN. Does it work? Good evening, folks, and welcome to SWSN. In the most recent of breaking news breaks, you and divinity, same thing. I don't know. Cannabis culture was, something that I wanted to really feature and highlight and talk about a lot on this show. And 2020 has been so 2020 that I can't even say, I'm not even going to say more than that. And thus I haven't really done very many Cannabis Talk episodes. And I don't feel like I've really said much besides throwing a bunch of crazy questions like spaghetti on the wall with the wrong kind of sauce, and it's just like, oh, that's just going to make a mess and cake over. And it's going to be really tedious to clean no matter what condition you choose to tackle it at. And why do we have... Oh, because it works. Because you want to see if it's... While you're cooking it, strand at a time, not whole boatloads of pasta at a time, you throw a strand of spaghetti on the refrigerator. It's the best place to do it. See if it sticks. If it sticks, it's done al dente enough. If it doesn't stick, if it's slimy and it slides or it bounces off, needs a little more time. I just channeled that from my mother, I think. If you believe in such things. Right. So cannabis churches would be a community center where you would, A, do some time and volunteer your charitable volunteer time to feed the hungry. No judgment, whoever off the streets for whatever reason. It's not going to be like, super expensive. It makes a costly bottom line per plate kind of situation. And also, in terms of, what the community does together, spending some time growing cannabis. Like really nice, really yummy. In the places where it makes sense, really delicious outdoor. In the places where the climate's just not really good for it. Although I say every church should grow outdoor and just let it be and then see what happens and experiment, let it adapt. Grow a few generations in your climate, whatever climate you got. Map it out, right? Because it's all about sunlight exposure and when it would, when night would peak over into like triggering it to flower, because it gets triggered by darkness, which is fun. But I digress. So you'd have all that kind of fun, volunteering and blah blah blah, and you would learn how to grow it and other healthy, important for your nutrition, both physically, mentally, and spiritually, other important plants, including foods that, lo and behold, growing your own food used to be how we got by. Everyone's real proud that they are the grandchildren of a grandmother that survived the Dust Bowl by canning and peaching and growing food in their own scrawny leftover rain barrels or whatever they did. But how many and I know a lot of people do. Plenty of people are, if not off the grid, most certainly bordering on pretty decently well prepared to straight up hardcore prepping for whatever. Way more than I am. I'm not claiming to be that, right? But if there's freedom, let's bring it to that final rallying cry. As we survive 2020 and we gently nudge the great orange chosen tyrant out of the people's house and back onto Fifth Avenue and into his own little tower where he can sit on his golden shitter and shit and tweet about whatever he wants, all he wants, because free speech and free will and freedom, good old American freedom, he's got that. I don't begrudge him that. I don't hate him, right? I just don't want him deciding political policy. Never mind what I think about the duopoly. That became a whole nother problem when he actually took office. So forgive me if it seems like that's all I've been rambling about this entire time. But I think that to a certain degree, I think you'll see where my points have laid out a certain pattern and they all weave together into something that makes sense. Worth contemplating at any rate. So, right, it's been a rough year. Next year, theoretically, knock on wood, it's going to peak out. And here's the gloomy, dark and stormy news. If the worst case scenarios that I'm hearing on, the various outlets that I find generally tend to not run with things that are too wacky and too way off base. In other words, whatever other corruption may be involved, when they report out probable forecasts of stuff, they pick their shit carefully. And it turns out to be what it turns out to be a little bit. No offense. Whereas other outlets have way less of a great record in that regard. And I know all about the media empire problem. Did an episode already. We'll come back to it. Do another episode again. I just like acknowledging it, and letting it sit. I am a person, just to round out and make sure that these are. I really do think we should be able to grow it like tomatoes, because just in case this isn't clear in anyone's mind, who's the stoner, right? Like, who's not connecting the dots? It is food. Like, your conscious approach, if you approach it like a party drug, like you want to get shit-faced, it will shit-face you. Is it the plant itself doing it? No, not necessarily. Do I think that the plants, while alive and collectively over time, vis-a-vis through the probability waveform function that is their species, the way I believe we as humans and all life that is alive as their own species, whatever species they're in, each species of life has its private species network, and then all life is part of the web of life. That's not just a metaphor for how the food chain works. That's like an actual functional, energetic, structural thing. And an infinite ongoing series of events that creates a system, if I may be so bold as to say. And at that level, cannabis, I think, like all life, has a nexus of consciousness that's sort of the consciousness for that level of that species. And the human species has, what do we call them? We call them the Gestalt, the Yeshua, the insert other names here that don't come to mind right away. So, right, do you approach cannabis to get fucked up? Do you approach cannabis to help facilitate your internal body, mind, soul awareness while you meditate? Because if you haven't tried that, I sincerely, enthusiastically encourage you to give that a whirl for like 9 weeks. Whatever your cannabis ritual is, set aside 9 weekends worth of doing it like meditation. Not the whole week, whatever, just 90 days. Never mind 9 weeks. What other pressing thoughts? Right, during this time, as we transition from orange tyranny to much more traditional blue tyranny. What else? They've been calling it tyranny since long before Trump came around. That's the real problem. So the echo chambers are already that cranked up. They might slip and or, backslide and or have to unfortunately compromise on some of this bold progress we've made with cannabis, because some people are still full of nonsensical misinformation and brainwashing content about cannabis, and they don't realize that it's yes, you can party with it. Yes, you can also sort of dose appropriately, adjust your consumption and meditate with it, and also you can eat it. And you can eat it in such a way that it does not get you high, right? It requires heat. You can do a whole episode about that. But I've rambled, I've rambled for almost already an hour. And I'm supposed to not do that. I'm supposed to do less than an hour. As always, friends, I humbly thank you for tuning in and entertaining the wild, wacky series of spirally, not quite out of totally control, not totally quite out of control series of thoughts that I, for some reason, feel compelled to share with you vis-a-vis, this podcast show of opinion talk radio style. May you have a lovely rest of your day. Be safe. And remember, folks, always, when it comes to cannabis and when it comes to being a responsible enthusiast, always check into what your local jurisdiction is adopted in terms of what the rules are and their interpretation of the rules. There's a patch, we are this glorious experiment in 50 different little tiny countries pretending to be one big giant country. but effectively, successfully actually being one giant country that is made up of 50 little tiny countries and a few mildly oppressed provinces that we still sort of cling to, just like any empire. And here we are, right? So they're different. Because I've met and spoken to people, bless their hearts, strangers. I wouldn't have known their names, but just it came up in conversation while out and about in public back in ye olde ancient days before COVID-19 burnt us all out and forced us all to get really exhausted with each other and ourselves. But I would chit-chat with strangers on the street while out and about doing things, right? Especially if doing things meant going to particularly public places. And sometimes it would come up. And, more so up in the Bay Area, not to point fingers or cast aspersions, but also in other places whilst I have traveled, there are people of a particular enthusiast level with cannabis, a certain ferventness, a kind of almost like they've achieved a kind of what's the word, fanaticism. What's that other one? There's another one that I worry about because they're like they were, and this is, I've known some of these folks from a bit before we got to this much more normalized place. And I'm not trying to rat anybody out, but there's a culture of this, right? We make media around weed and defying the law in order to smoke it. Because when a law is wrong, is it not our duty to defy it? And, in a world that's already rotten with all kinds of corruption on all kinds of levels, and as another meme, to cross-germinate memes, on a country founded on stolen land, no one should go to jail for a plant. Would you tolerate getting hauled ass to jail for growing lots of tomatoes and sharing that with your community? No. Except for the fact that they get a little bit too acidic, especially if you eat too much all at once. Tomatoes are relatively speaking healthy for you. Cannabis, dear friends, as a plant is food. And you can eat it. Oh, I've already said that. At any rate. Thank you for joining me. Let's not allow the progress we've made be used as a bargaining chip in the, as we crest that horizon of getting over 2020, getting through 2021 and into, the full cycle. Because 4 years suddenly disappears and goes by in a blink of an eye, folks. I remember the day Donald Trump announced and literally came down from his, billionaire's apartment in his, in a tower with his own name on it, where he has a gold-plated toilet and, on a pair of escalators that is intended to look like it's accented and featured in gold plate highlights. If not, as if trying to imply it wants to be entirely made of gold. And that's the way it looks to me. It's kind of gross. And, like it was yesterday. And here we are, December 18th. 33 days, I think, if I'm doing the math correctly in my head. 34 days, 32 days, somewhere in there. 30 plus days. A little over a month in traditional monthly day to ratio terms from what should be, according to everybody on the anti-Trump coalition, the day where Biden, rightfully so, mind you, not because he stole it, not because of China. If it wasn't Russia, then it wasn't China. Although, put a pin in it because Russia's come back with a vengeance already. And I don't even have time to talk about that, and I don't want to. We got to make sure that our our interests and rights and progress towards a national collective decriminalization and reclassification of the plant doesn't get thrown out. So we need to honor and remember and tell each other about such incomplete attempts like trying to get the law to recognize cannabis as a sacrament. And I don't know if this is a stupid thing to add as a button here, but for anybody listening that may be associated to that particular First Church of Cannabis or the First Church of Weed or any of the various other pot-related churches that I've seen in the last, 4.5 years, 6 years, in the last decade or so, because several have cropped up. I don't know how many are like ongoing and are thriving, but bless your hearts if you are. If you are listening to this show and you are not a member of a cannabis church, but you are a cannabis enthusiast, and you didn't realize there were cannabis churches, you're welcome. Go find one in your state. And if there isn't one, ask your stoner friends, why isn't there? Oh, I could have spent like a whole hour talking about how I would run a cannabis church, by the way. But you know, like a sort of community free and secure and very clean and very safe hostel in the sense of like, you know, the way the Europeans use the word, not the way that horror movies use the word. Oh, wow. I suddenly kind of had that weird vibe, flashback feeling of thinking it's only been 20 some odd minutes. It's been 66 minutes and 59 seconds. 70, it's been 67 minutes. I should stop rambling. Thanks for tuning in, friends. I hope you get a kick out of my shenanigans of podcasting. As a podcaster, I'm just tinkering and free flowing and sharing you my real and sincere thoughts about the world, despite the fact that I am an illusory and elusive literary fictional character, as voiced by a real life human actor. But yeah, we should question organized religion. We should look into alternative religions as a future subject for a potential podcast episode. And I should say that I endorse cannabis as church. I think we should be able to go to church and eat of the body of the plant. And some people think that may sound gross, but I have nibbled on some, like the sprouts of the very tender, very green parts of an established plant that hasn't been triggered yet to flower, but that's like branching out and filling out. Oh my God, there's some robust, delightful, weedy. No, it's not like drinking wheatgrass, although maybe a little bit. But I have to say, there's so many other stories. I did briefly under back in the early days of, like I said, when I first got my cannabis license, tinker and experiment very badly with growing on my own, long before I ever came across the community of cannabis growing enthusiasts that share their understanding and tips and tricks and other knowledge on Facebook. Right? I didn't know that's a thing that's well established. That community needs to hook up with the church community, and everybody needs to round each other up and organize volunteer work and then funnel donations from the surrounding neighborhoods to keep cannabis use safe, legitimate, adult, over 21. And I think we should do a roundup and fix everybody's laws so that like it's, I don't know where there's variance, but there's variance. And we should just like, it should be respected like alcohol, because if you're too young, there's known negative impacts. And if you're not prepared for its, it can have really kind of disorienting effects. But it's also not like progressively life-destroyingly toxic, and it just gets worse for you the way alcohol does. That is a known fact. Alcoholism is alcoholism. And even if you're not an alcoholic, anybody who's like an enthusiastic drinker eventually sort of has to confront for themselves, for various reasons, which we'll just leave anonymous because it's sort of, everyone's medical history is their own private bullshit. But you start confronting things that you're like, oh, maybe if I just cut back on on my bar nights. But I digress. I'd rather, not that I'm an abolitionist when it comes to alcohol. I just like I don't want to take away anybody's guns. I'm that weirdo in the middle that wants to defend my lesbian, polyamorous, pot farming, married, bisexual neighbors. Protect their pot field while they preach how cannabis is a sacrament from the divine feminine, goddess of Pachamama Earth, and everybody gets to chill out and relax and meditate. Why is that? Why is that so horrible? Anyways, I spiraled out of control, but I hope you were entertained, and I hope you started to have your own interesting, curious thoughts about why cannabis and community building, not organized religion and judgment and fear-mongering and end-of-the-world peddling, but responsible culture pillar building, for an awkward label. That's what a cannabis church would do, right? As well as provide and or create actual meditation and or spiritual rituals in which you imbibe and experience the refreshing, delightful, nuanced levels of experience that can be had with just a little bit of microdosing of some of these different sacred plants. Cannabis is just one of which. If you do it under a safe setting, with like a place where people can like chill out and nap without it getting weird and creepy, and or Uber rides safe to and from, so that boom, 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 and the community's about doing that in the way that, to wrap things up, it's proven that cannabis on many levels has beneficial impact on people when administered intelligently. And so does an interesting collection of other plants, which have curiously either been vilified, straight up made illegal, or, just sort of thrown into the mix. And there you go, friends. Not that I want to go crazy, full radical, like get over there and start like LSD church or crack church. No. But weed church? Yes. And I'm just going to stop rambling now, because I've certainly rambled for long enough.
Well, folks, that bowl is cashed and dusted. Thank you for joining me for yet another most excellent session of Cannabis Talk. Stay lit, pay it forward, and remember, the world needs healing, and cannabis heals. until next time, I have been your spiritual cannabis mystic talk show host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo.
All praise the healing cannabis. Om.